on Saturday, at the 6 no, and it was killing that and any other cause. Maybe for good reason throughout the year, the previous was calls for that were longer and more down a long would read out years from the 5 maybe no longer for all they more now it just and as he not like let me audience he took me along and he did it was all on for he was always and for style as a leader like been the police of people everywhere and essentially the happy animals enslaved on because million credit and fortune. You did Henry Napoleon egg 60 or 2 drink at the pool with things leaders water was in bonus when I back just inside of that like each one straw every that people as of profile executed by meanwhile, the A complication rate pill just not offer a time there has been to attack to the windmill. The nature of jealousy. I give to Jason. He's also the regular the animals I mean, but for him, Fred hit several nations. An that it holds himself to go and attack the council of fashion considered it beneath his dignity to have subscription. The pigeons who were still sent out to anywhere on Foxwood, and they were ordered to drop their formal of death to Frederick. In the late summer, yet another machination. The wheat crop was full of weeds, and it was discovered that on what is snowball weeds and with the seed corn. A gander who had pre the plot had committed guilt and immediately committed suicide by swallowing deadly nightshade. The animals learned that, as many of them believe hitherto, the order of animal hero first class. This was merely a legend which had been spread some time after cowshed by Snowball himself. So far from being decorated, he had been censored for showing cowardice in the battle. Again, some of the animals heard this with a certain bewilderment, but Taylor was soon able to some that made that fault. In the autumn, by a tremendous exhausting effort for the harvest to be gathered at almost the same time, the windmill was finished. The machinery had been installed, and Whymper was negotiating the purchase of it, but the structure was in the teeth of every difficulty by inexperience of primitive implements, of bad luck and Snowball's treachery. The work had been finished punctually to very day. Tired of proud, animals walked and which was beautiful. It had been over lay them low this time. And we thought how they had labored, what to overcome the enormous difference that would be in their lives when the sails were turning and the dynamo. When they had thought of all this, their tiredness forsook them, and they gamboled around and round the windmill, uttering triumph. Napoleon himself, attended by his dogs and his cockerel, came down to inspect the completed work. He congratulated the animals on their achievement and announced that the mill would be named Napoleon Mill. 2 days later, he struck the price when Napoleon announced that he had timbered. Tomorrow, Frederick's wagons would arrive and begin carting it away. Throughout the whole period of Pilkington, Napoleon had been in secret agreement with Frederick. All relations with Foxwood has been sold. Had been sent in. The pigeons had been told to avoid from death to Frederick to death to Pilkington. At the same time, animals that the story of the attack on Animal Farm were completely untrue, and that the tales of to animals had been greatly exaggerated. All these rumors had probably originated with his agents. It now appeared that Snowball was not, after all, hiding on Pinchfield Farm, and in fact had never been there in his life. He was living in considerable luxury, so it was said, at Foxwood, and had been in reality a pensioner for years past. The pigs were in ecstasies over Napoleon's cunning. By seeming to be friendly with Pilkington, he had forced Frederick to raise his price by 12 pounds. But the superior quality of Napoleon's mind had shown, in fact, that he trusted nobody, not even Frederick. Frederick had to pay. There was something called a check, which seemed a piece of paper to promise to pay when written upon it. But nothing in real 5-pound notes, which were to be handed over before the timber was moved. Already Frederick had paid up, and the sum he had paid was just enough to buy the machinery. Meanwhile, the timber was being carted away at high speed. When it was all gone, he held in the barn for the animals to inspect Frederick's banknotes. Smiling and wearing both his decorations, Napoleon reposed himself on a bed of straw on the platform with the money at his side, a china dish from the farmhouse kitchen. The animals filed slowly past, and each gazed his fill. And Boxer put out his nose to say, and flimsy lightnings stirred and rustled in his breath. 3 days later, there was a terrible hullabaloo. Whipper, his face deadly pale, came racing up the bicycle, flung it in and rushed straight into the farmhouse. The next moment, roar of Napoleon's apartment. The news of what had happened spread round the farm like wildfire. The payments were forgeries. Frederick had got the timber for nothing. Napoleon had called the animals together immediately and in a terrible voice pronounced the death sentence of Frederick, which should be boiled alive. At the same time, he warned them after this treacherous deed was expected, Frederick and his men might make their long-expected attack at any moment. In addition, 4 pigeons were sent to Foxwood with a conciliatory message with good relations. The very next morning, the attack came. When the lookouts came racing in with the news that Frederick and his followers had already come through the 5 barriers. Well, the animals sallied forth to meet them, but at this time they did not have the easy victory that they had had in the Battle of the Cowshed. There were 15 men with half a dozen guns between them, and they opened as soon as they got within 50 yards. The animals could not face the terrible expulsions and the stinging pellets, and in spite of the efforts of Napoleon and Boxer to rally them, they were soon driven back. A number of them were already wounded. They took refuge in the farm building and peeped cautiously out from chinks and knotholes. The whole passed and bring the women in the hands of the enemy. For the moment, even Napoleon seemed at a loss. He paced up and down without his tail and twitching. Wistful glances were sent in the direction of Foxwood. If Pilkington and his men would help them, they would turn. On it was penciled the words, "Serves you right." Meanwhile, Frederick and his men had halted about the windmill. The animals watched the May went around. Two men had produced a crowbar and a sledgehammer. They were going to knock the windmill down. Cried Comrade Napoleon. "We have built the walls far too not comrades." But Benjamin was watching the movements of the men intently. The hammer in a hole near the base of the windmill. Slowly and with an air of almost amusement, Benjamin his muzzle. "I thought so," he said. "Do you not see what they're doing? In another moment they are going to blast." Terrified, the animals waited. It was impossible to run the buildings. The men were seen to be running in all directions. Then there was a deafening roar. The animals, except Napoleon, flung themselves flat on their bellies. Huge black smoke was hanging where the windmill had been. Slowly, the went to exist. At this sight, the animals' courage returned to them. Fear they had felt a moment earlier were drowned in their rage against this vile, contemptible act. A mighty up, and without waiting for further orders, they charged forth in a body and made straight for the enemy. They did not heed the cruel pellets that swept over them like hail. It was a savage, bitter battle. The men got close to the quarters, lashed out with their sticks and their heavy boots. A cavalry and nearly everyone was wounded. Even Napoleon, who was directing operations from the rear, had the tip of his tail. The men did not go unscathed either. 3 of them had their heads blows. Another was gored in the belly by a cow's horn. Another had his trousers nearly torn off by Jesse Lubeck. When the 9 dogs of Napoleon's own bodyguard, whom he had instructed to make a detour under cover, suddenly baying ferociously, panic overtook them. They saw that they were in danger. Frederick to his men to get out while the going was still good, and the next moment the cowardly enemy was running. The animals chased them right down to the bottom of the field and got in some last kicks as they forced their head. But they were weary and bleeding. Slowly they began to limp back towards the their dead stretched upon the grass moved some of them to tears. And for a little while they halted in silence. The people once stood. Yes, it was gone. Almost the last was gone. The foundations were partially destroyed, and in rebuilding it, it could not make use of the fallen. This time the stones had vanished too. The force of the expulsion had flung them to hundreds of yards. It was as the windmill would never be. As they approached the farm, Squealer, who had unaccountably been absent during the fighting, came skipping towards them, whisking his tail and beaming with satisfaction. Heard from the direction of the farm building the solemn boom. "What is that fright?" said Boxer. "To celebrate our victory." "What victory?" His knee bleeding, and he had lost his shoe and split his hoof, and a dozen lodged themselves in the hind leg. They destroyed the windmill, and we worked on it for 2 years. We will build another windmill. We will build 6 windmills. I cannot appreciate, comrade, the mighty thing that we have done. Enemy was an occupation of this very ground that we stand upon. And now, thanks to the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, every inch of it back again. And we back what we were, said Boxer. That is a victory, said Squealer. They looked at the pellets under Boxer's painting. He saw ahead of him the heavy labor of rebuilding the windmill from the foundation, and already in action he braced himself for the task. But for the first time, it occurred to him that he was alone, and perhaps his great muscle not what they once were. But when the animal was flying and heard the gun firing again, times it was fired in all, and the speech that Napoleon made congratulating them on it, after all, that they had won great victory. The animals slain in the battle in a solemn funeral pulled the wagon which served as a hearse, and Napoleon himself walked out in person. 2 days were given over to celebration. There were songs, speeches, more firing of the gun. Apple was for every animal, and 2 ounces of corn for each bird, and 3 biscuits. It was announced that the battle would be called the Battle of the Windmill. That Napoleon had inauguration. The order of the governor, which he had conferred on him, and every the unfortunate affair of the banknotes was forgotten. It was a few days later that came upon a case of whiskey in the cellars of the farmhouse. It had been overlooked at the time first occupied. That night there came from the farmhouse the sound of loud singing, in which the strings of the were mixed up. At about 9:30, Napoleon, wearing a bowler hat of distinctly seen to emerge from the back door, galloped rapidly around the yard. But in the morning, a deep silence hung over the farmhouse. Not a pig appeared. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Squealer made his appearance, walking slowly and dejected, his eyes dull and his tail hanging behind him, with the appearance of being seriously ill. He had called and told them the terrible piece of news to impart. Comrade Napoleon was dying. Was laid down outside the doors of the farmhouse, and the animals walked on tiptoes. With tears in their eyes, what to do, their leader were taken away. A rumor went around that Snowball had introduced poison in Napoleon's food. At 11 o'clock, Squealer came out to make another announcement. His last act upon earth, Comrade Napoleon pronounced a solemn decree. The drinking of alcohol was by the evening, however, Napoleon appeared to be somewhat better. Squealer was able to tell them that he was well on his way to recovery. By the end of that day, Napoleon was back at work. On the day, it was learned that he had instructed Whymper to purchase in Wellington some booklets on brewing. A week later, Napoleon gave orders that the small paddock beyond the orchard, which had been previously intended to set aside as grazing ground for animals who were past work, was to be plowed up. The pasture was exhausted and needed reseeding, but it soon became known that Napoleon intended to sow it with barley. About this time, there occurred a strange incident, which hardly anyone was able to understand. At about 12 o'clock, there was a loud crash in the yard. The animals rushed out of their stalls. It was at midnight. At the foot of the end of the wall of the big barn, where the 7 commandments were written, there lay a broken in two. Squealer, temporarily stunned, was sprawling beside it, and near dogs immediately made a ring. Squealer the farmhouse, and he was able to walk. None of the animals could form any idea as to what it meant. He nodded his muzzles with a knowing air and seemed to understand, but would say nothing. Later, Muriel, reading over the 7 commandments to herself, noticed that yet there was another of them had remembered wrong. They had thought the 5th commandment was no animal should be forgotten. Actually, the commandment read, no animal shall